Bruce Lee is one of the most exceptional men who have ever lived. He was able to play ping pong in 1 against 2 with a nunchaku, or to light matches in full flight with this same nunchaku. He took martial arts to another dimension, and many of today's techniques come from him. In today's video, we will see 10 reasons that make Bruce Lee a Superman. Here we go. Number 10. The Dragon Flag. Bruce Lee was a fitness fanatic. According to his widow, Linda Lee, there was not a single moment when he did not play sports. He watched television while training every muscle in his body. But Bruce Lee was mostly concerned with the construction of his trunk. He thought that the central area of the stomach was used in almost all movements and was therefore very important for martial arts. Always wanting more strength, Bruce Lee did tons of exercises, some of which have gone down in history. One of these exercises is the Dragon Flag. It is considered one of the most difficult basic exercises in bodybuilding today. And yes, Bruce Lee is not an amateur. Stallone popularized this move in Rocky IV, but it was really Bruce Lee who took it to another level. He was able to support his whole body on a bench, and that only thanks to his shoulders. In other words, only these shoulders touch the bench. Imagine if you were to be one of Bruce Lee's next opponents and you heard all these rumors about him. Personally, we would run away as far as possible. Number 9. Catch rice with chopsticks. Remember that scene in Karate Kids where Pat Morita catches a fly with chopsticks? Well, Bruce Lee is even better. It is said that Bruce Lee was so eager to increase his reflexes that he threw rice in the air and tried to catch it when it fell. For him, being able to catch a small piece of rice falling down is clearly the best way to prepare to fight tall men trying to hit you. Although it seems impractical, the dexterity and skill required for such a feat means that his hands will evolve, and a simple punch will be so easy for him that the power generated will drive you crazy. Number 8. Stronger than punching bags. Bruce Lee was too strong for ordinary punching bags. In his day, Lee used a multitude of devices that were usually custom-made for him by a close friend. Some of them were made at the request of Bruce Lee himself. Others were built out of sheer necessity. As for his punching bag, he was completely crazy. Bruce Lee's custom punch bags were huge. The normal bags weighed about 66 pounds, while those of Bruce Lee weighed 300 pounds, and it was filled with metal, not because he wanted to show off, but because he literally couldn't use a non-metallic bag without breaking it. It is even said that Bruce Lee managed to push a punching bag through the ceiling, but this story reveals more legend than anything else, and he never actually did anything like it. Number 7. Do push-ups with one finger. How many push-ups could you do? If the answer is not infinity, you are no match for Bruce Lee and his younger years. Lee apparently liked to show off in practice, and one of his favorite tricks was doing one-finger push-ups. Yes, you heard correctly. He was doing this with the sole ambition of showing that he was quite simply capable of it. If you thought you were impressing others with your 20 push-ups, you failed. But Bruce's immense strength wasn't just limited to his fingers. He could also do armed pull-ups, and some sources claim he could do 50 as if nothing had happened. Of course, this ability isn't unique to Bruce Lee, but the fact that he did it simply because he wanted to show he could do it says a lot about the rest of these abilities. Number 6. The 1-inch punch. The 1-inch punch is one of Bruce Lee's most famous feats. And it's no surprise that Lee was able to summon such power into his arms, but he was still able to knock down a grown male while standing less than a centimeter away. It's such an impressive feat that scientists have been digging into the brains of martial artists to see how such a thing was even possible. There are even rare footage of Lee punching a plank of wood at close range and smashing it. There are also stories where he uses his own students as an example. Bruce Lee is keen on teach what he learned to the next generation. But if you don't want him to take you as an example, don't bother him too much anyways. Number 5. You literally couldn't hit it. Bruce Lee was famous for being really good at fighting people. Naturally, he spent a lot of his time being challenged in street fights because people in the 70s were surprisingly stupid. The fights almost always ended the same way. Bruce scared away passers-by because fighting them randomly was pointless. But sometimes the passers-by insisted and became violent, so Bruce had to get mean and fight in the streets. Bruce Lee was challenged 3 times to a fight, and none of his opponents could land a single blow on him. He was just too quick, and Bruce took down his opponents, deftly dodging every punch. Bruce Lee's speed is so legendary that most cheetahs have a picture of him on their wall, and Usain Bolt has to watch his movies in slow motion. Number 4. He could rip a coin out of your hand. One of Bruce Lee's most impressive feats was his ability to snatch a coin from your hand with breakneck speed. Standard protocol was for Lee to place a coin in your hands, after which he stood a few feet away from you. He then asked you to close the palm of your hand as soon as you saw him move. The second you saw the motion blur, you'd clap your hands and wrap them around the room. But your smugness won't last long, unfortunately, because then you'll see Lee smiling as he holds your coin. You then open your hand, seeing another coin that Lee will have placed in your hand and swapped for the other in less than a second. It was usually the last thing most fans saw before their heads exploded in frustration. It's no surprise that Lee died young. He clearly lived through time at twice the rate of normal people. Number 3. He was too fast for the cameras to catch. It's a fact, Lee's movements were too fast for the cameras to catch, so they had to slow down the footage. But people seem to miss the coolest part. When this problem appeared, Lee was on a TV set and he noticed that all the fight scenes just showed him standing still as people fell in front of him. For some reason, the show's producer didn't like the idea of an actor with magical powers, and Bruce Lee gave that impression because of his superhuman speed. He therefore asked Lee to slow down, which he did, but it produced a blur. Despite the fact that he had slowed his speed, we still could not distinguish these moves. Do you think nowadays, with our new cameras, we could finally see how fast he was? Number 2. He dislocated a guy's shoulder with a slap. If you want to claim someone has superhuman powers, it makes sense to have to prove it. As we said, Bruce needed special training equipment that could handle his power, but sometimes he practiced with people stupid enough to stay within striking distance. This distance, by the way, was mostly respected, and few people dared to venture there. Unfortunately, one day in training, this was not the case, and Bruce Lee dislocated the shoulder of a guy who was training with him. When confronted, Bruce got really confused since he felt it was more of a slap than a punch. Number 1. It literally sends people flying through the air. Despite all his strength and training, Bruce Lee rarely showed his true power, mostly because, as we've seen, he was able to hurt people just by standing too close to them. However, Bruce had a trick he liked to use. One of his most prized possessions was his training shield, which he carried with him everywhere. And one of his favorite pranks was asking people to hold his shield and let him kick. Most of the time, Bruce Lee could easily knock people through the air with his shield punches. When you manage to make others escape the gravity of the earth simply by kicking them, it's only a matter of time before God notices and takes you to heaven to serve as his personal bodyguard. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. Our channel has loads more great videos like this. Bye!